incursion, can you pinpoint a period in which that position of the United States, which was counter to the Russian position in the Middle East on many issues, but there was still mutual agreement, fell apart? And do you think there's a specific?
I'd have to pull down things from a database to be sure of this, but I think the Bucharest summit, at which the Americans backed the expansion of NATO towards Ukraine and the Caucasus, was a very crucial moment, and also Vladimir Putin's speech in Munich, in which he warned against his expansion, was ignored, were crucial. And then, of course, the Georgia war, which anybody who cares to read the Tagliavini report into it, commissioned by the European Union and intended to blame Russia, which actually came out and said the Georgians started it, will know the Georgians did start it, though you wouldn't know that from almost all the journalists and politicians who speak so knowledgeably about it, saying the Russians started it. The Tagliavini report, it's on the web, you can read it, and it points out quite clearly the Georgians started that war, and they had a belief, a very strong belief, that the United States would come in on their side, in which they were happily disappointed. That was very nearly an attempt to start the Third World War, and came remarkably close to success. And I remember a certain David Cameron going out to encourage it as well.
Yes,
just standing about and to believe.
Saakashvili, a good friend of George Soros. Yes.
Thank you for taking our questions. Apologies, I don't know if people can hear me with the wall in the way. Jean Kirkpatrick, the foreign policy advisor for Ronald Reagan, wrote about dictatorships and double standards during the Cold War. These dictatorships and double standards are still prevalent at the moment in Western foreign policy, as we've seen in Iraq and Saudi Arabia, Libya and Iran. My question to you is it truly better the devil you know? For example, Libya with Gaddafi was responsible for the death of Yvonne Fletcher and also had links to the IRA in Northern Ireland, but the migrant crisis was non-existent and Europe was a more stable place as a result. So should the UK stick with the known dictatorships as the alternative political vacuum in Iraq, Libya and Syria is arguably worse, or should we stand by the principles of a liberal Western democracy?
When you say should we stand by the principles of a liberal Western democracy, what do you believe those to be?
I would say, well, the politicians in charge at the moment would say that they are of democracy and having a, what probably actually would be a free market economy, but they would argue that it would be having the right to vote.
Well, let me interrupt you a moment. If you believed that, but if you were also intelligent and informed, would you believe that it was possible to go to Baghdad with a lot of tanks and rockets, overthrow the existing government, and then set up a country sort of more or less comparable to Belgium in terms of... let's not get too ambitious. Let's say Belgium, with a sort of functioning National Assembly, some sort of police force, courts and so forth, more or less rule of law, peace and quiet. Do you think you could do that in Iraq?
No.
Of course not. Well then, what is all this about then? If you can't just go overthrow, it's very easy to, any fool can kill a man. Nobody can create a human being. It's very easy to destroy a government and a state. We did that in Iraq. I went to Baghdad shortly after we died. You could walk across from Jordan into Iraq. There was nobody there. The state had gone. And that man Bremer dissolved the police force and the army. There was nothing there. There was no. We created a vacuum into which hell came rushing. And if you hadn't learned anything from that, then you could learn even more from what we did in Libya, where what we did was again to create. I mean, I yield to no one in my dislike for the IRA. In fact, I don't need to yield to anyone because everybody else seems to like them now. But I don't. And Gaddafi's intervention on the side of the IRA was disgraceful, but he had stopped doing that. And if we're going to break off relations with and invade countries for siding with the IRA, then I think it's time we landed forces on the shores of the United States, which is the principal aid to the IRA, especially during the moment of its ultimate triumph in 1998. So much as I resent the behaviour of and dislike and condemn the behaviour of Colonel Gaddafi, as a dictator, I don't think anyone can claim that what's replaced him has been an improvement. And that surely must, whether you're in favour of liberal democracy, which I don't think I am, or not, it surely must be the test in foreign policy. Is your intervention going to make it better or worse? And it's not hard to answer, unless you're David Cameron, in which case it is.
Someone who sat in cabinet with Cameron and also on the so-called Cobra committee addressed the vote and said to me that the problem with Cameron was, as Blair, if they saw what Trump may describe as a bad dude, they automatically assumed that they must be removed, they couldn't be engaged with, and the alternative, whatever it may be, must inevitably be better. So I think there's a question as to whether the leaders like Cameron actually believe that, or whether that is a reason they use to pursue some other obscure foreign policy goals. And it seems to be, as you just said about never underestimate the stupidity that is active, it seems to me that it is the matter.
Well, it does seem to me too, and I'm close to despair at the poor quality of the people who we find. Where do we find them? Who we elevate to positions of power. And the thing is, partly is because we know most of the time when a British government minister says go, nobody goeth, and when he says come, nobody cometh. Nothing happens because British governments are almost powerless to influence events. But in the one area of military action, if David Cameron or Anthony Blair or any of these people says to the military go and bomb wherever it is, they go and bomb it. It's the one thing governments can actually do. And we hand them this responsibility, and we choose, by some process, mysterious to me, people who are not merely poorly qualified for it, or even unqualified for it, but should actually have been disqualified from it at about the age of 13, which is the mental age which many of them seem to have. It is a matter of despair, and despair is my political position. And anybody asks me, what should I do? I say, go, get out while you can. You're young enough to go, and don't ask me where to go, because that means you're too wet to make it. But if you want to know my political position, it is, if you're too old to go, then hope you die before it happens, and if you're not too old to go, then go. So there is no other. It is a matter of total despair. I see no escape from it, no correction of it, no learning process from it, nothing in politics or media coming into existence to challenge it or overthrow it. Nothing, absolutely nothing at all. Just acres and acres of despair and misery and potential war. No, I'm not joking.
I think there are some...
You will live to see it, I probably won't.
Yes. You touched on Lithuania and how the British people could be hoodwinked into thinking that Putin might invade us. I know that NATO regularly holds exercises simulating Russian invasion of the Baltic states. So is that justifiable, or is there something else at play there?
I don't know. It's all part. Once you've got into this idea that there is a Russian threat to the Baltic states, and it's a military threat, then you will undoubtedly exercise in that fashion. And the Russians will then start exercising nearby as well. They would. That's what people do. Once people go mad, then they do mad things. And there it is. And it increases, as Professor Richard Sackway in his excellent book, Frontline Ukraine, says, NATO has created the very fear which it claims it was created to dispel. It makes fear, it makes tension where there wasn't fear or tension before. The truth about the Baltic states is, and you need a bit of history to know this, the Baltic states as they are now were part of the Russian Empire in 1914. They ceased to be part of the Russian Empire because of the German invasion of those lands, and also because of the German seizure of them, and then the Peace of Brest-Litovsk, which gave you a shadow of what German and now European Union ambitions are in that region. And they have only ever been independent on the sufferance of neighbouring powers. And they are currently independent on the sufferance of the European Union, of which they're not really properly independent because they don't have their own currencies, they can't defend themselves, they don't have any real borders. They are that they are experiments in the limited sovereignty developed by the German Empire in 1917 to seduce countries under the Russian yoke away from it, and that's what they are. They will always be at the mercy of the two major neighbouring states. But if Russia has any sense and really wants them back, they won't get them back by invading them, it'll get them back by diplomacy, just as it's working on the Visegrad countries now quite successfully, and their true allegiance to NATO is weakening all the time because they don't have any interest in that direction. So I don't, if there is a threat to the westernization of the Baltic states, which there may well be, I don't think it's a threat of invasion. It's a threat of reconnecting with and diplomatic and economic reabsorption in some sort of Russian system. But that can't be prevented by military action. It might even be brought about by it.
I agree with a lot of things that Peter says, and I disagree with some of them, and I know that disagreeing with Peter Hitchens in his presence is quite a nerve-wracking experience. But is there anyone in the room who is A, bold enough, and B, completely disagrees with what's been said, Peter Hitchens' view on foreign policy? Please make it that is the case, and don't just ask a different question. So, you disagree.
I disagree with one point. I agree with much of what you said in terms of your criticism of the establishment and excellent analysis about foreign policy. But I do disagree with you, if I may say so, is that something of a counsel of despair, because whether we like them or not in every respect, we are seeing an upsurge democratically against this political establishment in Eastern Europe. I mean, Hungary isn't our, Orban isn't our ideal politician, but he does represent an alternative. Brexit represents an alternative. Even Trump represents an alternative. There is a democratic upsurge that has had enough of this particular establishment. Are you too pessimistic?
I'm not really particularly keen on democracy. I mean, this is a heresy which goes unspoken, but the great possessions of both this country and the United States were never democracy. The United States, when it was founded, was not a democratic country, and didn't achieve anything approaching universal suffrage democracy until the era of the First World War. And we weren't a universal suffrage democracy until 1948. The Representation of the People Act, which finally abolished university seats, a sad blow. So I'm not, most of our worst years have been since we adopted universal suffrage democracy. Our possessions are liberty and the rule of law. And this is one of the things I learned in my time in the Soviet Union and Russia, was that what that country needed above all, and what it didn't get any encouragement to adopt from us, was those things, liberty and the rule of law. The classic example of this in the modern world is Hong Kong. What distinguished Hong Kong in its time when it wasn't, as it increasingly is now, a besieged semi-province of the PRC, what distinguished Hong Kong from the People's Republic of China was not democracy, because it never had any. It was freedom, particularly of the press and of speech and of assembly and thought, and the rule of law. And that was what made it a transforming experience. To cross the border at Lo Wu from one to the other and go from one completely different system. It wasn't democracy. Democracy leaves me unmoved. Democracy in Turkey is being used, as it has many times in history, to destroy freedom. And I've no doubt that President Erdogan is a Democrat. And that's precisely what scares me about it. I don't. You accuse me of counsel of despair. Well, I plead completely guilty to that. If I could stand here and say, yes, I see a real prospect of political change for the better. You're reaching for people like Donald Trump and Viktor Orban as signs of hope.
It's not that bad.
These are squalid people. Yes, it is that bad. Yes, it is that bad. I mean, you have to turn your face away from so many of the horrible things which these people have said and done in their lives, and pretend to yourself that they're not what they are, to be enthusiastic about their rise. They are not. No civilized person can ally themselves with them. You cannot do it. You will become what you behold if you do that, and it's very dangerous.
If I may leap to that gentleman's defence, is there not a case, and I saw
it's a perfectly good point, I just disagree.
I saw this in some of your writing about Corbyn, that you're probably not a Corbynista, but you saw something refreshing about his appearance. So I guess I don't want to speak for you.
On the matter of Jeremy Corbyn, it's quite simple. I felt that there was a stupid, thoughtless conformism. I don't wish to help the Conservative Party or anybody else defeat Jeremy Corbyn, because I have no friendship for the Conservative Party and wish to see it thrust headfirst down the nearest plumbing. But I don't. That's not my aim. I've simply come to the view that telling the truth in an era of lies is the supreme duty, and it's the only thing you can do, whether it has any effect or not. The other thing is, I just found it. I find it repellent. I'm a former public school boy. I find it repellent watching everybody in the playground piling on top of one person. I won't do that, and I'm against it, and I'll try and pull them off if I can. And I saw, in the case of Corbyn, it's stupid. It's similarly with John Bercow, this unanimous piling on to one person. Everybody's saying the same thing. Well, that's not what an honourable person does, whatever happens. But the point about Corbyn is this, and I went to one of his rallies by accident, as it happened, but it doesn't matter. It was fascinating that I could not imagine. It was in Cambridge, outside Great St Mary's Church. Some of you will be familiar with the scene. A pleasant late summer evening opposite King's College Chapel, and a crowd. The Great St Mary's Church, which holds 1,100 people, is full to bursting, and a crowd of several thousand other people are standing outside waiting for some hours for Jeremy Corbyn to turn up. Can you tell me any other politician in this country who could achieve that? Because I can't, and therefore, no, I don't think so. And therefore, it seemed to me that this was significant. And I thought, as I surveyed and talked to that crowd, that there were two lots of people there. There were people in their early 20s who thought that it was refreshing to find any politician who seemed to have the faintest clue about the problems which they had of finding and keeping work and of finding and keeping places to live, and indeed setting up families and doing things that people want to do. And there were people in their 50s and 60s of my age who were refreshed to hear a politician speaking informed sentences to them as if they were adults, rather than some kind of ad mass victims. And these two groups of people were and are politically important. I don't think you'll win the next election. I don't think Labour can. But I think that if the Tories were seriously concerned about the appeal that he has, instead of pouring audio over his head all the time, they'd take him seriously on his own terms and address him as such. And I think all this stuff, which is constantly using, oh, he did this with the IRA, it's all useless. Turning to people and saying Jeremy Corbyn was close to Sinn Féin, when your government supported the most disgraceful surrender to terrorism in modern history, to the very same people. Well, they say, okay, so if you care so much about it, why are we still fighting them? Why are we paying them large sums of money? Why is Northern Ireland about to be the first piece of territory in Western Europe to be handed over from one power to another as a result of physical violence? Why is that? If you're really so all get out angry about the IRA, why are the Brighton bombers walking free? Why can't you actually arrest anyone from the IRA, or if you do, you have to let them go? Why are soldiers who fought in Northern Ireland themselves being arrested and questioned? You can't make it stick, because you yourself don't really believe it, so it doesn't work. You have to have an answer, and that answer involves behaving in an adult fashion. Now, there are no adults in the Conservative Party, as far as I can see, so they can't do it. So they resort to the water cannon filled with swine, which is, of course, the ultimate weapon of politics, but one which, if you use, degrades politics. And one of my other fears, and this has been going on since the Wilson era and the adoption, all of you should read, if you haven't read it, The Hidden Persuaders by Vance Packard, about the techniques of the advertising industry. It's still unanswered, all the things it says about the manipulation of the public. These techniques were adopted in the 1960s by politics. And time again, the voters of the Western world have been presented with false prospectuses by liars. And time and again, they've been disappointed. How many times can you do this before you devalue the currency of trust so much that people tire entirely of the system of democracy? I don't think it can go on all that much longer myself.
They have already.
Yes.
Sorry, you mentioned earlier that you don't think that there's a legitimate kind of national interest for a war with Russia. Do you think that Salisbury might constitute something like that? Because obviously there's been, fairly big news, and if it is as has been reported, then surely that would be an attack on British soil against somebody that we have accepted as one of our own.
There are several problems about Salisbury. Does anybody here know what happened in Salisbury?
I don't believe logic.
Well, no, I'm not asking what you believe. I'm asking what anybody can know.
Media blackout, that's what.
Well, I don't media blackout, whatever you like. The truth is that nobody knows. I don't think the British government knows. And tracing responsibility for actions like that is even more difficult. What I do know about Russia is this, that it's very likely, it's very unlikely, that some kind of direct responsibility would run from the office of the president to the killing of, or attempted killing of 2 Russians in a British city. The idea that some kind of, it's as simple as that the Russian state said, let's kill these 2, or kill him and kill anybody who gets in the way, is dubious in the extreme. There are all kinds of other complexities, some of them raised by people who put them down. All kinds of other complexities about Novichok and the nature of the weapon involved, which would seem to me to make it difficult to work out. People engage in quite serious and sometimes violent intelligence operations on the soil of other countries. The French notably did so in New Zealand over Rainbow Warrior, and this didn't result, as far as I know, in a Franco-New Zealand war. Or if it has, I haven't seen them fighting it. The British and American governments in 1953 cooperated in the violent overthrow of the Iranian government, a stupid folly for which we still pay a very heavy price. Leave aside the attempts of the United States government to assassinate Fidel Castro with exploding cigars and all the rest of it. It's difficult to get too hoity-toity about these kinds of things, and it's also very difficult to make a casus belli out of something where you don't actually know who did what. If they could prove, if they could produce an email or a telephone call from Vladimir Putin saying, yes, let's kill the Skripals, that would be different, but I think it's kind of unlikely.
What do you think is a legitimate alternative to the narrative that's been given?
I have no idea. I mean, I speak where all I know, and where all I do not know, I cannot speak. I think it was Wittgenstein who said that. It's what struck me as very good advice.
Yes.
Yeah, we haven't talked about Brexit. What do you think is the optimum outcome from the Brexit negotiations for Britain?
Oh, the optimum outcome would be the Norway option, without any questions. I think people. You must have been in a car where somebody says, they probably sound a bit like Nigel Farage. I know a good shortcut. This is a shortcut. A referendum was a shortcut. A referendum, I had always believed that what we needed was a political party committed to departing from the European Union to win an election on that programme, knowing what it wanted to do, rather than the current ludicrous situation of a whole load of politicians who don't believe in leaving the European Union charged with doing so, which couldn't really be more ridiculous if you tried. It's like having a taxi driver who doesn't want to go to Aberdeen driving you to Aberdeen, and you may not get there. And my own opinion from the start of from the moment the referendum result came in was that we would move from being half in the European Union as we are now to being half out of it. And it would be quite hard to tell the difference between the two. But if we actually have to technically leave the European Union, then if we don't want serious economic problems as a result, which would cause many, many poor people to suffer and might well, in my view, lead to a political crisis so strong that we beg to be allowed back in, which I don't think any of us would want to see. I think the Norway option is by far the best. You can lift it off the shelf, plug it in, and it works. It doesn't require 3,000 years of negotiation a la Swiss border. It would just work immediately. And the huge problem of non-tariff barriers for third countries, which will be devastating for us if we don't stay in the European economic area, would be solved. And as close students of the matter will know, the Liechtenstein option allows us to stay in the EEA and have some controls over our borders, contrary to constant claims, and we would lose 75% of the interference of the European Union in our affairs. I say what really frightens me is a catastrophe, a cliff edge catastrophe, after which there is such panic that there is a crash second referendum held which asks to go back into the European Union, which would mean, in case anybody has any doubt of it, we would be committed both to Schengen and to the Euro. We couldn't go back in without it, whereas if we go for the Norway option, neither of those things would be a possibility.
It's happened before, of course, with Macmillan crying at de Gaulle's door.
Nuclear bombs.
Yes, sir.
can you shout a bit?
Speak up.
You said that you feared what Britain has done to other countries, so other people might want to do to Britain in the future. That's like a fear. So, are you referring to, say, like the regime change, say, like Britain has done in the Middle East? What do you fear, who do you fear could do that to Britain? Surely not a Middle Eastern country. Are you referring to like Russia or China? No countries in the Middle East will ever be that strong.
I think I think there is a grave danger that if we continue to pursue our policy of confrontation in the Middle East, that we could drag. Read, all of you, if you haven't, Barbara Tuchman's The Guns of August. And particularly read the section about the pursuit of the Breslau and the Goeben across the Mediterranean and the drawing of Turkey into the war and the red stain spreading across the whole of Europe, which people have thought would be confined to a few countries in Central Europe. You cannot control the spread of war once you have it. We are trying, it seems to me, to fuel a Saudi-Iranian war in the Middle East. If we do that, then it's quite possible that we will draw Russia into it and we will draw ourselves into it, and you will then have a European war into which this country would be drawn. The range and power of, any of you been in a war zone? We're not, I mean, I've been accidentally into a couple, and I've been to places where there have been wars, notably Baghdad. Do you know the power of modern conventional munitions? People worry about nuclear war. Well, it is terrible. But modern conventional munitions are terrifying. They have the power to destroy, probably equivalent to what was done to Hiroshima. The conventional warfare is not some kind of picnic. It is terrible. And the ranges of missiles and the abilities of airplanes open this country, if we were to be foolish enough to engage in a European war with Russia, to destruction of our cities. Yes, it is possible. But the other thing is that I don't think that the Chinese state sits and looks at what we do, whether it be in Yugoslavia or Libya or Iraq, and does not think that one day on the Security Council of the United Nations, when it is challenged over some action it takes against us or against our allies, that it will not say, but in 1986, the United States Secretary of State defended exactly the same action that we are now taking. These are precedents. We have created the precedents which will be turned against us. We are a minor power in a world where we are becoming a more minor power every day, and the country which we in some ways wrongly view as our principal protector is also becoming weaker. And the United States is not. You cannot endlessly be relied to maintain the Pax Americana. It's fraying very fast at the edges as we speak. China is beginning to build that global fleet which the Soviet Union abandoned. Even now, its first homemade aircraft carrier is about to go into service. China will be on the moon sooner than you think. China has nuclear weapons. China has a modern, large army and is rapidly modernizing its navy and its air force. And it knows that its future will depend on it being a global, not just an Asian power. This will have effects. As I say, I will probably be dead before they are felt, but you will not be. So you should be losing sleep about them now.
But if you believe Hillary Clinton, so it's already happened, and we're all Russian agents that have
I know I am.
overthrown a...
Well, we always believe Hillary.
Peter, it's 10 past 8. We've, I think, got the room till 9:30. What time do you need to?
I have a long way to go home. I think I would quite like to finish up fairly soon, and you've got to eat as well.
Understood. So, would you be okay with taking 3 questions in one bunch?
No, that's a horrible Blairite thing, which means that none of the, it was invented by Alistair Campbell. It means none of the questions gets answered. No, I'd much rather answer one question properly than
Mark Zuckerberg being in favour of that. So, one more question. Hands up. Is there anyone that is round the corners or one of these small people there now that I can't see that might have been?
Are you waiting for a question?
Well, yeah.
We have one here.
Here we go. Yes,
Well,
sir.
if there was another referendum on EU membership, would you vote in it?
No. Can I go now?
Yes. Very good. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, for those of you that are staying for dinner, I think we're